Hello, good morning, everyone. This week we are going to be going through the nervous system part 2, which is going to be the anatomy of the brain, as well as the spinal cord. And we're going to also talk about the various functions of the different brain parts, different lobes, what they're responsible for, as well as some of the deeper structures inside the brain. And so let's get started. So here is your lecture 6 study guide. The camera's not working for some reason, but that's okay. We'll just go ahead and do this. Okay, first question. What are the 3 layers of the meninges from the deepest to the most superficial? Give a brief description for each. Okay, so the 3 layers of meninges, starting with the deepest layer, is going to be the pia mater. Okay, so pia mater. It's a M-A-T-E-R. It's not matter, it's mater. Okay, so individually they are called meninx, and together plural is meninges. Okay, so what is the description of the pia mater? It is very thin layer, very thin layer that adheres, that means it's stuck to, okay, adheres to the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, the best way to think about this is like a shrink wrap that goes around something. Okay, it fits very tightly, fits very snugly. Okay, it follows the contours of the brain and spinal cord. So if there is a gyrus, a bump, then it will follow that. If there is a groove, a sulcus, it will go into that groove as well. Okay, so it's a tightly sealed shrink wrap around the brain, basically. So that's the deepest layer, the pia mater. All right. And someone tell me, what is the next layer? What is outside of the pia mater? Anybody remember what it is called? Okay, outside of pia mater, it is going to be the, that's right, Safi, the arachnoid mater. Okay. Arachnoid means spider web appearance. So arachnoid mater, spider web like structure. Okay, and the space that is in between all these spider web structure, we call that the subarachnoid space. Okay, the subarachnoid space is filled with cerebrospinal fluid, okay, or CSF, which is kind of the fluid that does a lot of stuff. It nourishes the cells, wash away metabolic waste, right? Create buoyancy to allow the brain to be floating in the skull. So we'll talk more about that in a bit. Okay, outside of the arachnoid mater is going to be the most superficial layer, and that is, of course, our dura mater. Okay, dura mater. Okay. So the dura mater is very tough, white, fibrous connective tissue. Okay, that is actually directly touching that is in direct contact with the cranium, okay, which is like the skull, right? Skull and the vertebra, right? The backbone. All right. Now, I should also mention that the dura mater is actually two separate layers that are fused together. Okay, they are stuck together, but every now and then at some location they would separate. Okay, these separate at certain locations to form the durovenous sinus. Okay, the durovenous sinus is where you will be draining the excess CSF, right? Okay, we'll come back to that later. But let me just quickly show you in case you not sure what I'm talking about. So if we go all the way down, there's going to be a diagram with the meninges and the brain and all that. This is labeled in the lecture recording, so you can go watch that yourself. But just very quickly, you can see here, this is the dura mater right here, right? This here. So you can see the two layers, one layer here, and then there's a second layer beneath it. Okay, maybe I can color that for you, highlight it for you. Okay, so that's one layer, and then it separates. It separates, right? It separates right here. And we color the other layer with another shade. Okay, it separates like that. And it creates a pocket in between. Right? So this pocket, that pocket is the durovenous sinus. Okay, so if you're wondering, like, where is this in the head, right? I cannot really quite wrap my head around it. So if you think about looking at a person like this, okay, so this is the person. Okay, you're looking at the person straight at the front. This would be the brain. Okay, so the right hemisphere and then the left hemisphere, that's the brain. And then we are zooming in over here. All right, so you're one of the locations where you have the durovenous sinus is right here in the middle at the top of the head. Does anybody have any question? Okay. I should also mention to you that there are a lot of 3D models that you can see in the lecture. So let me just quickly show you what it is. If you go to your course page, under content, we're doing lecture 6 right now, lecture 6. Study resources, 3D models. Okay, so you can click on these 3D models and it will show you like the brain and stuff like that, right? So I'm just gonna open one up, see here, right? And you can move them around, you can zoom in, you can click on them, it will tell you what it is. So that's very useful for studying something complicated like the brain. All right, so now I'm going to take a look at this meninges, right? Okay, so again, we have the skin here, and then underneath this is the skull. Okay, the skull is just your like the skeleton head, right? If you think about, you know, like Halloween, right? This the head of a skeleton. That's called a cranium, the skull. Okay, and immediately underneath that, you would have your pia mater, dura mater rather. You will have your dura mater. Okay, and again, it's two fused layer. You cannot really see that there are two layers here. And then underneath, you have the arachnoid mater. And then the space you see here, that is the subarachnoid space. Okay, so all the CSF is gonna fill up this space, and then it will get drained at the durovenous sinus, like I said earlier. Right? This is the brain down here. The cortex, the outside of the brain, is the darker layer here. That is the cerebral cortex. It's made up of gray matter, and then you have the white matter that are on the inside. Okay, so immediately outside of the cortex, you will have this pia mater. It's very thin. It's, you see, it's stuck to the brain, right? If there's a groove, it's going to go in, it's going to come back out like that. Okay, so these are the three layers of the meninges. Okay. Let's go back to our study guide. Okay, next question. Where's the next question? Right here. Describe how each of the following protects the CNS. Okay, so starting with the skull and the vertebral column, that is pretty straightforward. These are bony structures that offer physical protection against blunt force, right, and direct hit. Okay, you slip and fall and you bump your head, that's okay. The skull will protect the brain. Okay, that's the skull and the vertebral column. The meninges, we just talked about the meninges, right? So what does it do? Well, it helps anchor the CNS. Remember, CNS is the brain and the spinal cord, basically. They anchor the CNS in place. So they're not going to be like moving around when you shake your head. You know, when you do cartwheels, your spine is not going to, you know, fall out of place because the meninges help anchor it in space, basically. The meninges, as we saw, the subarachnoid space, it contains the cerebral spinal fluid, okay, which provides buoyancy, right? And that's important because it will prevent concussion. Concussion is basically the bruising of the brain, right? If your head moves to the left, the brain actually moves to the right, right? So you have a little bit of fluid to cushion it, right? To protect it, right? Okay, so like, you know, if you think about the head, right, this is someone's head, and then this is the skull, okay, and you have the brain floating inside. Surrounding the brain is going to be this cerebral spinal fluid. Right? So when your head moves forward, your brain actually goes backwards, right? If that doesn't make sense to you, think about in a car, okay? If someone jams on the brakes suddenly, right? So the car stops, but your body still goes forward, right? Okay, and then when the car accelerates forward quickly, then your body goes backwards, right? So similar situation is happening here. The head goes forward, the brain goes backward. The head goes backwards, the brain goes forward, right? Inertia. And what happens is the fluid will cushion the brain so that if the head goes forward really quickly, the brain's not going to smash into the inside of the skull. Okay, so that's what the buoyancy is for. Okay, next we have the BBB, the blood-brain barrier. Okay, so can anyone tell me what forms the BBB? The blood-brain barrier is formed by what type of cells? Does anybody remember at all? That's correct. The BBB is formed by astrocytes. Okay, astrocytes, these are star-shaped cells. Okay, and the function of the BBB is to create a barrier, to prevent, toxins from entering the CNS. Okay, but is not perfect. Right? Lipid soluble substances can still cross. Okay. And finally, we have the cerebral spinal fluid that we have been talking about for some time now. And this is formed by ependymal cells. Ependymal cells in the choroid plexus. Okay, and the choroid plexus are found in the walls of the ventricles in the brain, right? Some function of the CSF, right? Distribute nutrients and remove metabolic wastes. Okay, it also helps circulate neurotransmitters, right? Remove excess neurotransmitter as well. Remember, neurotransmitters are these molecules that are needed for communication, right, between neurons. So there you have it. Cerebrospinal fluid. You make quite a lot, so approximately like 600 to 700 milliliters per day. Okay. Okay, what is wrong with this individual? What conditions is being shown here in these scans, CT scans? Does anybody know what is the name of the condition? Okay, thank you. It is hydrocephalus. Okay, so in hydrocephalus, there is an obstruction of CSF flow. Okay, somewhere along the way, it's blocked. Could be because of a tumor. Okay, could be because of like a hemorrhage or something. Okay, and that could result in the buildup of CSF in the brain, in the ventricles. Okay, so all that excess fluid is going to create high pressure, and that pressure is basically going to push on the surrounding brain tissue. Okay, so what you see here is an enlarged ventricle, enlarged lateral ventricle. Okay. All right, next we are going to talk about the flow of CSF, but let's quickly review the brain anatomy first, so that you will know what I'm talking about. Let me see if I can make this full screen. Hold on. Full screen setting, enter full screen. There we go. Okay, so this is this the right half of the brain or the left half of the brain? You guys know? Am I looking at the right half or am I looking at the left half? Yep, this is the right half. Okay, and you can see, you know, the cerebellum is at the back, right? So this is the front, and then this would be the right half of the brain. Okay, so what do we have here? Well, we have a couple of things. First of all, we have the again, a lot of these stuff we didn't learn, right? So like if you see something we didn't learn, just delete it. Okay. Here we have the lateral ventricle. Okay, but this is only a part of the lateral ventricle. The actual lateral ventricle is like a C shape, and it's really, really big. So I think we can isolate this. Right? You right click it and you click isolate, and you can see this is the lateral ventricle. Okay, it's a C shape with a little bit of a horn or tail at the end. Okay, if you look at it from the front, it will look like this. We are looking at it from the medial side. All right, so in the walls of these of the lateral ventricles, you are going to find the choroid plexus, right? I think I can draw on this. Let me see. I don't know how good it is, but we'll find out. So over here, oh, it's not bad. We are going to have the choroid plexus. Okay, choroid, CHOROID plexus. Okay, it's not too good, this drawing thing here, but you know, we'll have to do. So the choroid plexus it's a vascularized tissue that will allow you to make the CSF, right? The CSF is essentially produced from the blood directly. Okay, you basically take certain component from the blood and then you create it. And the cell that is responsible for making that, as we mentioned earlier, is the ependymal cells. Okay, ependymal cells within the choroid plexus is going to be making the CSF. All right. So let's see if I can go back. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here, the lateral ventricle. Remember, it is much bigger, a much bigger structure, but you can only see a little bit of it. Okay, so once you make the CSF will fill up this lateral ventricle. You have two lateral ventricles, okay? One in the right hemisphere, one in the left hemisphere, okay? And as I told you, it's embedded within the cerebrum itself, okay? Now the fluid is gonna come out and it's gonna go to the third ventricle here. Okay, so I said two lateral ventricles, right? So that's like ventricles number 1 and 2 already. That's why this one that I'm pointing at, that's the third ventricle. Okay, now you cannot really see it in this model, but trust me when I tell you that there is a tiny hole that connects the lateral ventricles to the third ventricle. Okay, and it's somewhere here. Anybody remember the name of that hole? Okay, you got to know all these for the test, right? So tell me, what is the hole that connects the lateral ventricle to the third ventricle? Okay. A hole is called like a hole, an opening in the body is called the foramen. Okay, Foramen, foramen. I'll write this down for you later. Okay, and Savi's right. This foramen, this hole connects the lateral ventricle and the third ventricle. We call that an interventricular foramen. Okay, I'll write it down for you later. But again, it's all in the PowerPoints. If you haven't watched the recordings, you know what I always say. Make sure you do. So from there, it's going to drain into the third ventricle. Now, the third ventricle will also have its own choroid plexus. So you have choroid plexus here, you have choroid plexus here as well. So not only does CSF being produced in the lateral ventricles, you will also be producing it in the third ventricles. Okay, so after this fills up, the CSF will now go down to the fourth ventricles. Okay, so the fourth ventricle exists between the pons at the front here and the cerebellum. Okay, so pons, cerebellum. Right, you remember the medulla oblongata, right? So the fourth ventricle also is within that structure as well. Okay, so connecting the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle is the cerebral aqueduct. Okay, cerebral aqueduct. This is actually quite good. I think if you click on it, it will tell you how to pronounce it as well. Okay, maybe not. I thought it did. Okay, but that's what it is. But it gives you like a little description here, right? Okay, of what it is if you need to. All right, so just to recap, lateral ventricle to the third through the foramen, third to the fourth through the aqueduct, and then this will exit the base of the skull, and it will go into the center of the spinal cord. All right, more on that later. But any questions so far about what I have just said? Are you sure? Already. So let's go back to here. Okay, use a flow chart, show the flow of CSF. All right, so we're gonna have the I'm gonna start in the middle of the diagram here, and I'm gonna write choroid plexus. Choroid. Remember, choroid plexus is a vascularized tissue. Vascularized means a lot of blood vessels, and we will find that in the lateral ventricle, third ventricle, and the fourth ventricle. Okay, so I'm gonna draw an arrow here. We're gonna say lateral ventricle. Okay, remember you have two of them, and I'm gonna say third ventricle. And I'm gonna say fourth ventricle. All right, so give you a moment to write that down. So as I said, the CSF, once it fills up the lateral ventricle, it will drain into the third ventricle, right? Of course, at the same time, the third ventricle is making its own CSF as well. So the hole which this CSF goes through is called the interventricular foramen. Foramen. Okay. Then from the third to the fourth, it is going to be the cerebral aqueduct. Okay. Now, some will continue to go down through the central canal. Central canal of spinal cord. Okay. If you take a slice of spinal cord, let me show you. I think I have a picture here. This is spinal cord, right? In the middle of the spinal cord, there's a hole here. That is called the central canal. Okay. This will be filled with CSF. Okay. Now, some of it is also going to go to the subarachnoid space. around the brain, right? And this is going to go to the subarachnoid space. Around the spinal cord. Okay. So let me just try to show you what I mean by that. Okay, so here's your brain. Okay, looking at it from the front or from the back, doesn't really matter. Okay, and then this is going to be your brain stem, and then it's going to become your spinal cord, right? Okay, and the spinal cord, if you watch the lecture, you would know it becomes a ponytail at the end, like this. Okay, so what happens is, let's draw some ventricle as well. You have your lateral ventricle, third ventricle, fourth ventricle. Okay, so the CSF is gonna flow here, right, from the lateral to the third to the fourth, and then it's gonna go down all the way in the middle of the spinal cord, right, through the central canal. But when it gets to the bottom, it's gonna come back up. Right? It's gonna exit at the bottom. It's gonna come back up, and surround the entire spinal cord, right, in the subarachnoid space. It's going to surround the brain as well, like that. Okay. So eventually the entire CNS, entire central nervous system, will be cushioned by the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. And then ultimately, what's going to happen is these things will go to the dural venous sinus, where it's going to be drained and it's going to return to the blood. And then afterwards, you know, you're going to extract components from the blood to make more CSF in the core plexus. And then this just keeps on going and going and going. Does anybody have any question? Okay. Next one, list 5 different types of glial cells and briefly state their function. Okay, so remember, glial cells are supporting cells of the central nervous system. Okay, glial cells, they are supporting cells of the nervous system. Yes, these notes will be posted. Okay, it's always posted. Okay, after class, and there's always a link to it, right? Okay, supporting cells of the central nervous system, of the nervous system in general. Glial cells, please give me some glial cells. Okay, anyone? Please, please, please. Okay. Some people are messaging me the answer. Yeah, okay. Yeah, go ahead. Ependymal cells, very good. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. There we go. Ependymal cells. And their function of ependymal cells is to form cerebrospinal fluid. Very good. Schwann cells, yeah. Schwann cell. Sorry, Schwann cells. And their job is to form myelin. Form myelin in the PNS, right? Peripheral nervous system, anything that's not brain and spinal cord. And related to the Schwann cells, of course, is the oligodendrocytes. Okay, which form myelin in CNS. Okay. What's another one? Looking for one more. We talked about it already. What is the other one? Astrocytes, that's correct. Astrocytes, which form, what did they form? What do astrocytes form? Astrocyte forms the blood-brain barrier, right? Okay, very good. Any question? Well, it does ask for 5, but then I only have 4 spaces. There's one more. I don't remember if I talk about this, but I'll just give it to you. There is the microglia as well. Okay, so these are essentially, you can think of them as macrophages. Macrophage of the CNS. Okay, so they go around and then they, do what white cells do, right? They eat up things that are not supposed to be there. So that is also an example of a glial cell. Okay, but I think these are the main ones that we talked about. This might have been briefly mentioned in the previous lecture. Okay, next, list examples of white matter and gray matter. Perhaps we should define what white matter and gray matter is first. Okay, so white matter. What is white matter? White matter is primarily contains myelinated axon. Okay, the myelin, right? It's the waxy coating that goes around the axon to speed up conduction. That stuff has a whitish color. Okay, so that is what white matter is. Whereas the gray matter is primarily consists of cell bodies. Okay, short, unmyelinated axon. Okay, glial cells. All right. So some example of white matter. Okay, now in general, you should remember this. Okay, in general, gray matter is on the outside of brain. Okay, and inside of spinal cord. Okay, whereas the white matter is on the inside of brain and outside of spinal cord. Right, now there are some exceptions, but generally this trend is true. Okay, so let me show you the picture, the model of our spinal cord in a bit. I'm just waiting for you to copy what you need to. Then we're going to go back to the model. So over here, you can see this is the spinal cord, and on the outside, right, that's the white matter, and the butterfly that you see on the inside, that is the gray matter. Right? For the brain is opposite, right? You can see over here, well, maybe not this one, but like over here where we saw part of the brain, the gray matter is on the outside, whereas the white matter is on the inside. Okay, but there are some exceptions, right? As you will see in a bit. Okay, so white matter. Does anybody have examples of white matter? Like if I give you a multi-select question and I say, select all the white matter in the in the list below, what would consider as white matter? Okay, white matter would be corpus callosum. Okay, the corpus callosum is a bundle of white matter in the brain that allows the left and right hemisphere to communicate with each other. So if you take a look at this 3D brain, right? This is the lateral ventricle, and on top of it, you see, this is the corpus callosum. Okay, communication between the two hemispheres. Okay, we also have in the spinal cord, we have the ascending and descending tracks. Okay, in spinal cord. Okay, gray matter. Gray matter, we have the cerebral cortex. We have the butterfly, right, the butterfly shape in the center of the spinal cord. And we also have things like the thalamus and reticular formation. Okay, if you have no idea what these are, they are in the notes. Okay, I'll talk more about it later today, perhaps. Okay, moving on. Actually, let's do some polls. These are quite simple, but let's start simple. Go ahead. Okay, well, only 4 of you answered. And the correct answer is between the 2 layers of the dura mater, right? Okay, we explained how the 2 dura mater is usually fused together, but they separate at some locations, for example, the top of the head, and it forms the durovenous sinus. Okay, how about the next one? This one should be quite straightforward. Go ahead. Okay, only 3 of you answered, and the answer is, of course, the ependymal cells. Okay, moving on. Okay, this diagram I already did in class, so I'm not going to repeat it. Let's move on to the next one. Give 2 examples of spinal reflexes. Okay, so spinal reflex are basically reflexes that involves the spinal cord only. Involves the spinal cord only. Okay, and reflexes are these subconscious reactions, right? That does not require conscious input or prior learning. It's hardwired into our system. Okay, so 2 examples out of that of spinal reflexes include, for example, the knee-jerk reflex. Okay, you tap on the patella tendon and near the knee, and then your leg kicks forward a little bit. There's also the Babinski reflex. Okay, for kids under the age of 2, you stroke the bottom of the feet. The big toe would curl upwards, and then the rest of the toes would fan out and curl downwards. Okay. Give 2 examples of cranial reflex. Okay, so these involves the brain only. Okay, the brain only, and it's conveyed through cranial nerves. Okay, the 12th pair of cranial nerves. These are conveyed through spinal nerves. Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Example of cranial reflex includes swallowing, right? Swallowing, sneezing, coughing, right? Vomiting. It's like 4 examples there already. Other things would be like pupil dilation, right? Or constriction. Right? Your parasympathetic system and your sympathetic system would control this, okay, through the cranial nerves. Give 2 examples of skill memory. So skill memories are sometimes called like muscle memory, right? These are stored in the cerebellum. Okay, they are very persistent. They do not go away. Examples of skill memory, anyone? Give me some. Okay. Typing, riding a bike. And you will not forget how to ride a bike, even if you haven't ride one for, 3-4 years. But these things that you are trying to remember for the test, if you don't study for it, you will forget maybe like after a month, right? Because these factual memories, they are called decorative memory. Okay, and these are stored rather than being stored in the cerebellum. These are stored in what is the location for storing memories in the brain? Decorative memory. Does anybody remember the name of the structure? They are stored in the hippocampus. Okay, the hippocampus. So things like factual information. Okay, like 2 times 4 is 8. That's memorized in the hippocampus. Okay. Other things like formulas, right? Okay, equations, and then a bunch of other stuff that you have to memorize. Okay. That is that. All right, next we have the limbic system. State the function of the limbic system. This is essentially the reward system, right? The reward system. And list the four main parts of the limbic system. Okay, so what is the function of the limbic system? To put it simply, I guess we can say the limbic system will collectively cause pleasant and unpleasant feelings towards your encounters. Okay, so every day you encounter different experience. You do encounter different things. Okay, some things gonna make you feel good. Some things gonna make you feel not so good. And your limbic system will remember all these feelings subconsciously. Okay, and then what happens is the limbic system uses these memories to guide a person behavior that will increase the chance of survival. Okay. So, for example, if you eat something that make you really sick, right, causes an unpleasant feeling. Next time you see that same food, you'd be like, oh, I don't want to eat it. Okay, I recall that was not too good, right? And you have this repulsive feeling towards that thing, right? So that's part of your limbic system. Four parts of the limbic system, right? You have the hippocampus. Hippocampus. Okay, you can think of I think I might have mentioned this in the class. You can think of a hippopotamus. Okay, that's a hippopotamus wearing a hat. Okay, so hippocampus wearing a hat. Okay, so hippocampus, hypothalamus. A is amygdala. And T is thalamus. Okay, so these are the four main parts of the limbic system. Hippocampus, what it does is it will store memory. Right? We talked about that already. Hypothalamus is responsible for autonomic responses. Okay. And it kind of does so by regulating hormonal secretion. Okay. A lot of the feelings that we get are charged by hormones, right? Like when you're in a dangerous situation, the fight or flight response, that's driven by adrenaline, a hormone. Okay, so that's what this is. Amygdala is the center for emotion. Okay? Anything that you feel, sad, happy, anger, right? All those emotions originates from the amygdala. Okay? And then the thalamus will filter and process sensory input. Okay, so not everything needs to be processed. Not everything needs to have an emotional response. Okay, like otherwise we'd be like very dramatic person, right? Maybe. Okay, so some things just don't warrant to have a very drastic response, and the thalamus helps you, filter that information. Okay, so there you have it. That is the limbic system. Okay. All right, why don't we take a quick break, 5 minutes, and then we'll resume at about like 9:31. Okay, see you in a bit. All right, let's keep going. Next here, identify the lobe that matches the description. The first one contains the Wernicke's area. Wernicke area is the motor speech area, right? This is the part of the brain that allows you to create articulate speech, right? To be able to speak properly, right? With the proper syntax and all that stuff. That is located at the, oh, sorry. Ignore what I just said. Let's just try it again. The Wernicke area is the area that allows you to understand what other people are saying to you, okay? And to understand written instructions. That is in the temporal lobe. Temporal lobe, okay? Enables comprehension of speech as well as written instructions. The Broca's area is the one that allows you to produce speech, right? To speak properly. That is in the frontal lobe, okay? And for most people, these areas are on the left lobe only, okay? The left side of the brain only. Next, we have the primary motor cortex. Okay? This enables you to have voluntary control of your body parts, okay? To move the hands, move the leg, to talk, move your tongue and lips to talk. That is controlled by the primary motor cortex, which is found in the frontal lobe as well. Primary somatosensory cortex allows you to have sensations and feelings from the different parts of the body. You touch something hot, it's going to be processed by the primary somatosensory cortex. Okay, you know, something, you stepped on something, okay, and you feel the pressure at the bottom of your feet. That's going to be processed by the primary somatosensory cortex. Okay, so it processes things like temperature, pain, pressure, right? And it's located in the parietal lobe. Okay, so more specifically, which part of the frontal lobe, right? It is in the precentral gyrus. Okay, and this would be in the postcentral gyrus. Next, contains the auditory association area. An association area is an area that helps you form new memories related to a certain senses and to create kind of like a database, right, to compare it to. So, you know, if you recognize someone's voices, you hear someone's voice and you're like, oh, I know that person. That is basically stored in the auditory association area. And this is found in the temporal lobe. Visual information, that is in the occipital lobe. And information related to smell, that is also in the temporal lobe. Okay. Next, three main functions of the cerebellum. Okay. So number one, it stores skill memories. Okay. So again, the riding the bike, the typing, the shooting the basketball, the move of a dance, you know, cutting your food, right? You can virtually chop the food with your eyes closed if you have been cooking for long enough. All that is called skilled memory and is stored in the cerebellum. It maintains balance and equilibrium. Excuse me. So when you're walking, right, it uses all the sensory input, right, from the eyes, from the ears, and helps you maintain balance and not fall over. And if you trip, right, if you step on a trip on a rock or something, your body will try to immediately regain balance and regain equilibrium. And that's the job of the cerebellum. And finally, it ensures smooth execution of movements. Okay, so if you are imagining doing a layup in basketball, okay, you dribble towards the net and then you jump up and put the basketball in, right? All that motion gets planned out in the head, and then it's executed in a flawless manner. That is the job of the cerebellum, to make sure that when you actually perform the move that you plan to move, it's going to be a smooth execution. If you damage the cerebellum, then you would have jerky motion. Okay, it's, you know, if you try to walk or something, then it's like as if you're walking when you're drunk. Okay, a lot of people would describe it like that. So those are the three functions of the cerebellum. Okay, so let's map this brain out. All right, let's define the lobes first. Okay, so over here, this is going to be the frontal lobe. Frontal lobe. Okay, so the frontal lobe is responsible for like speech, voluntary movements, right? Higher order thinking, right? Consciousness. Okay. All these things are going to be happening in the frontal lobe. We have our parietal lobe here. Parietal lobe. So that is for somato senses. And that's one of the major functions of the parietal lobe, allows you to feel things. Okay. So the boundary between the frontal and the parietal lobe, right, is this line. And that is called the central sulcus. Okay. So in front of the central sulcus is your precentral gyrus. Okay. A sulcus is a groove, a gyrus is a bump, right? So there's a big bump in front of the central sulcus. We call that the precentral gyrus. And located on the precentral gyrus is going to be the primary motor cortex. Okay, where is it? So for voluntary movement, it is this primary motor cortex. Okay. I need a darker color probably. Right here, primary motor cortex. Okay, if you remember from the lecture, the primary motor cortex is actually separated into different zones, right? So like, you know, this part might control the hand and this part might control the face. Okay, and the leg is more up there and so on and so forth. So if you damage like a particular part, then only that part of the body will be affected. And over here, for somatosensory, it's going to be this area. Okay, so this allows you to control the right hand, because we are talking about the left brain here, and this allows you to feel the right hand. Okay, feelings from the right hand, controlling the right hand. All right, so let's write down what they're called. Okay, this is the primary motor cortex. And this here is the primary somatosensory cortex. Okay, again, this allows you to have voluntary movement. This allows you to have sensation, right? Process bodily sensation. E.g., pain, temperature, pressure, texture, all right, all that stuff. So if you damage this part, you cannot feel your right hand. You can still move it. If you damage this, but you have a stroke here, you cannot move your right hand, but you might still be able to feel it. Are we okay? You guys have been awfully quiet the whole morning. Any questions? All right. There's only 9 of you here, I think. Good job for coming to class. All right. Let's move on. Next one. What do we have? We have right here. We have the temporal lobe. Okay, so temporal lobe is primarily responsible for processing anything related to hearing and smell. Okay. So hearing and smell, it's right here. There's a Wernicke's area here for processing speech. Okay. Probably should not highlight these things. It probably doesn't make sense to highlight them here. Let me just erase them. Okay, so this right here, that is the Wernicke's area. Wernicke's area. Okay, so for comprehension, of speech and written written words. Okay, like you read this and you're like, oh, I understand what that means. That's the Wernicke's area. If you damage the Wernicke's area, you won't understand what I'm saying, even though you speak that language, and you won't understand what you're reading. There's another area that I mentioned earlier. Don't know if you remember. It's right here. Okay. Anybody remember what that area is? The left side of the frontal lobe for most people. Anyone know what this area is called? If you're thinking about the Broca's area, then you're correct. Okay. It is for fluent speech. Okay. If you damage this area, you have Broca's aphasia. You will not know what words to use. You might be using the wrong words in the wrong context. Okay. People might not understand what you're saying. Last but not least, we have our parietal lobe here, occipital lobe here. Occipital lobe, which is for vision. Anything that has to do with visual input, visual information, occipital lobe. All right. That is that. All right, moving on. Long answer questions. Does anybody have any requests for these long answer questions? Please let me know and I'll take them up. If not, I will just do the application questions. Any requests? (17 and 18? Sure. Okay, so let's do that. Describe the function of the hypothalamus. Okay, so the hypothalamus is called the master gland. The master gland of the body. Okay. It is responsible for maintaining, I'm just gonna do it in point form now, okay? Maintains homeostasis. Okay. Involves in homeostasis. So like internal balance, right? Okay, so involves in many autonomic functions. Okay. Such as sleep-wake cycle, your water balance in the body, right? Contraction during labor, all that stuff involves the hypothalamus. Okay, it's called the master gland because it uses hormones to control a lot of other glands in the body. Okay, so works with the pituitary gland to control the body via hormones. Okay. I'll come back to this page in a second. I just want to show you where it is. So there is the hypothalamus, and then that's the pituitary gland. Okay, you have the anterior and posterior pituitary gland, and that's the hypothalamus. So the two actually works together, and it secretes hormones. And we'll learn other hormones later on. Of course, this is also part of the limbic system we talk about, right? So with the hormones, it's going to be able to charge those emotions that you're feeling, right? It's going to emphasize it with hormone in some cases. And it just makes it more memorable. Okay. Thalamus, on the other hand, it is going to be right here. Okay, let me try to make this full screen again. Right here. Okay, so this is the third ventricle, right? Okay, if I delete the third ventricle, you can see behind it is actually the thalamus. Okay, you have two thalami, right? One on the right, one on the left, and it's made up of gray matter. So all the sensory information, except for smell, will go through the thalamus. Okay, so best example is like, you know, when you're looking at something, like when you're opening your eyes, there are a lot of things that you are seeing, okay? But not everything you see is going to be processed, right? Okay. So for example, let me just give you one quick example. You have been looking at this screen, right, for quite some time. Now I'm going to take away the screen. Does anybody notice what logo was present at the bottom left of the screen in the brain diagram? Does anybody notice that? On the bottom left of the screen, there was a logo. Does anybody know what the logo says? Yeah, okay. Unless you are, you know, paying attention, specifically looking for that, you won't notice. There is a logo right here that says BioDigital, right? Okay, so that illustrates the point. You were looking at the screen, but not everything on the screen gets processed, right? So your thalamus will filter out the stuff that you are not focusing on to prevent information overload, right? So some people, right, you heard people say they have like photographic memories, right? So, you know, for those people, they don't really have a good filter and you know, they just soak in everything, right? It sounds like a good thing to have, but it's actually not necessarily a good thing, right? Because it just doesn't happen to sight, right? It could happen to noises as well, right? If you're studying the library, you want to be able to zone out the sound in the background, right? So that's the thalamus doing its job, trying to filter out the information. Okay, so essentially, it will sort and filter out sensory inputs before sending them to the correct lobe. Okay, so you know, if you touch something hot, again, it comes up to the spinal cord, it goes to the thalamus, And then the thalamus is like, oh, that's important information. Let's send it to the right lobe. And it's because it's sensory information from the hand that's going to get sent to the parietal lobe. Okay, if you're looking at the notes and then you want to process that information, right? It's going to go to the thalamus, and you're like, oh, I need to read what this is saying, so let's send that to the Wernicke's area. Okay, and that's what it does. Okay, it filters sensory information, it directs them to the right place. Okay, so everything goes through the thalamus, except for the sense of smell. Okay, smell goes directly to the temporal lobe, bypassing the thalamus. Sierra has a request for number 21. Okay, so reticular formation. This is a web of gray matter. Okay, let me see. Well, let me see if I can pull up the lecture notes to show you. It's much easier than, me drawing it out. Where is it? Lectures. Okay, so reticular formation should be down here. There it is. Okay, so you can see the reticular formation. It's a web of gray matter. And essentially, if I have to summarize all these in a very simple sense, is it will gather your sensory inputs. Okay, so like what you see, what you feel, what you hear, it will use all these stimulus to maintain consciousness. Okay, so it arouses the brain by constantly processing these inputs, basically. Okay, so when you are sleeping, the reticular formation is going to be less active, but it's still kind of functioning in the background. So if you hear like something dropping, the sound of something dropping, or your child crying, or like a police car driving by with the siren on, right? The reticular formation will instantly wakes you up and gives you that mental alertness. Okay, so it's gray matter, and it uses all these senses as stimuli to arouse the brain. If you damage the reticular formation, you basically won't wake up, right? That's like what a coma is. I hope that answers your question. Okay, let's take a look at these application questions. On her way to class, Yvonne decides to cross a busy street but fails to notice a fast-moving car coming towards her way. When she finally sees the car, her heart rate and breathing rate increases, and she feels a burst of energy that helps her quickly move to the sidewalk. Describe how Yvonne's nervous system was able to process the sight of the car with the need to move her legs. This is very simple and straightforward. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about it. This, of course, when she sees the car coming, okay, that information is going to get sent up to the thalamus. Okay, so the thalamus will decide, oh, that is vital information. We should not ignore it, because if you get hit by a car, you're gonna die, right? So that information of the car coming towards you is dangerous, could be embedded within your limbic system. Okay, maybe you saw it, she saw it on TV, okay, in a movie or something. Someone get hit by a car, okay, and they remember, okay, that's not safe, okay, and then that information from the thalamus will then go to the occipital lobe, because it's related to vision. It will also go to the primary motor cortex, right, to elicit, to trigger a response, okay, because the response is to get out of the way, right? Okay, so the primary motor cortex allows you to have voluntary movement of your legs. Okay, so the legs help her get out of the way, and at the same time, right, the heart rate goes up, the breathing rate goes up. All these stuff right here is as a result of the sympathetic system, right? Okay, the sympathetic system is triggered during fight or flight response. When you're in a dangerous situation, it gets activated, right? And that's what gives her the burst of energy to just kind of, you know, dodge out of the way. Okay. Next one. You are walking to class, pondering the intricacies of physiology when you tripped over an unseen place in the sidewalk and fall. Unhurt, but embarrassed and angry, you jump up and glance around to see if anyone is watching. From your knowledge of neural anatomy and function, explain how the following areas of the brain might be involved in this scenario. All right, let's write this down. Okay, so the cerebellum. And what does the cerebellum do, right? Cerebellum. Okay, so this is responsible for conscious perception, right? Okay, so for example, you are going to be, cerebrum, not cerebellum. Cerebrum, okay, conscious perception. So for example, inputs from eyes, right, to see where you're going. Okay. There is something called proprioception. Proprioception, which is basically like the perception, okay? Perception of motion, location, and just the action, right? Action of body parts. Okay, so like proprioception is essentially is your body doing what you want it to be doing. Okay, if you're walking, is the leg moving, right, in the right way? Is the legs where they're supposed to be, right? And all those things, are they coordinating in the way that they should for that particular motion? Okay, that's called proprioception. And that is part of the job of the cerebrum. Okay, and voluntary movement, right? We know voluntary movement. Okay, so as you're walking, your cerebrum should be monitoring all these things. Okay, so various sensory areas will detect the misstep. Okay, so when you trip, then the cerebellum the cerebrum will definitely detect that, and it will also detect the falling and landing on the ground. Okay, so for example, you fall and it hurts. So where does the pain go? The pain will go to the parietal lobe, right? Okay. And then what happens is, in order for you to get back up, the primary motor cortex will initiate standing up and brushing yourself off. All right. So that's the cerebrum. The cerebellum, okay, which is the thing at the back, right, of the brain, that is there to maintain balance and equilibrium. But it failed in this case. Right? It was supposed to help you regain your balance, but nope, you were too far off the the equilibrium, and you're just gonna fall. So how is it gonna help in this case? Well, to stand up, right? Like you plan to stand up, so the cerebellum is gonna ensure smooth recovery as you stand up. Okay, it's gonna be a smooth, swift standing up. Okay. Now, it will also receive input from, well, we haven't really learned this yet, but I'm just gonna put it here. When you come back to it, you can look at it from vestibule, which is a part of your inner ear that helps maintain, that detects when you're falling. We'll learn that in the sensory organs next week. So receive input from the vestibule as you are falling. Okay. So again, that's next week. All right, finally, the limbic system. Limbic system. Okay. So the question talks about feeling embarrassing, right? So the amygdala, right? Triggers feeling of embarrassment and anger. Okay. Trigger the release of adrenaline. Right? Trigger the release of adrenaline via the hypothalamus, right? The hormonal pathway. The adrenaline gets your heart rate going, right? You might feel your face flush a little bit. Okay. And what happens? Well, you will probably, because it was an unpleasant experience, you will remember. Help create memory about this unpleasant experience. And next time, you will pay attention when you're walking. Okay. Especially around the same area. You're like, oh, I fell here last time. I got to be careful. Okay. It's like me, right? I told you I got bitten by a dog when I was running, right? So now, whenever I see a dog when I'm running, I deliberately like get out of their way. Okay? Like if we're on the same street, I will rather than run on the like instead of running along the sidewalk, I would run on the street instead if I see a dog coming, right? So that's my limbic system reminding me, like, dogs, they might bite you. Go away. Okay. Unless like next time I get hit by a car, and then I will have nowhere to run, not the sidewalk and not the street. But there is the application questions. Are we together? Any questions at all? Anything else that I've missed? Okay, let's fill in the blanks, and then that will be it. Okay, first one, site of regulation of water balance and body temperature. That is the hypothalamus, the master gland, right? 4 pairs of cranial nerves originate from this structure. That would be the pons. Pons means bridge. It connects different parts of the brain together through axons. Connects the 3rd and the 4th ventricles together. That is the cerebral aqueduct. The middle layer of the meninges, arachnoid mater collects excess CSF, dural venous sinus. Okay. It is when the dura mater opens up, the space in between, that's the dural venous sinus. Contains Wernicke's area, temporal lobe. Maintain muscle tone, balance, and posture. That is the cerebellum. Structure that forms cerebrospinal fluid, that would be the choroid plexus. And then the ependymal cells, right, inside. Layer of meninge that is in direct contact with the CNS, pia mater. Primary motor speech area, that's the Broca's area. Forms the sides and the roof of the third ventricle, thalamus. I showed you that on the 3D model before. Bumps on the surface of cerebrum, gyri. Singular is gyrus. An area found on the precentral gyrus, that is the primary motor cortex, which enables voluntary movement, right? There's a lot of brain parts that you have to memorize for this particular lesson. So it's a good idea to make your own cue cards, okay? Just with the words on one side and then the description on the other, right? Region on the parietal lobes where all somatosensory inputs are projected. That would be the primary somatosensory cortex. White matter allowing communication between two hemispheres, that is the corpus callosum. Okay, it's on top of the lateral ventricles when you are looking at a mid-sagittal section of the brain. Part of the limbic system responsible for memory, that is the hippocampus. Hippocampus actually means seahorse shape. Next, contains visual association area, that is in the occipital lobe. Glial cells that forms the BBB, astrocyte. A groove in the brain is the sulcus. Separating the two hemispheres, it is the longitudinal fissure. Outer layer of the cerebrum, it's gray matter, and we call that the cerebral cortex. Inflammation of the meninges can be caused by viral infection or bacterial infection, even fungus in some cases. We call that meningitis. And you can get vaccinated for that. Accumulation of CSF is the hydrocephalus. Water in the brain, that's what it means, right? Cephalus is the brain, hydro, water. Areas in brain where integration occurs and where memories are stored, that is the association area. Damages to Broca's area could lead to Broca Broca's aphasia. Okay, you won't be speaking in fluent, articulate manner. You might be using the wrong word in the wrong context. General interpretive area for speech, that is the Wernicke area. Relay center of the brain, thalamus. Every sensory input goes through the thalamus except for smell. Regulate hormones secreted by the pituitary gland. That is the hypothalamus, again, the master gland. Master gland maintains homeostasis through hormones. Also part of the limbic system, right? Use hormones to charge those emotions, give them extra intensity. A web of gray matter running through the brainstem, responsible for maintaining mental alertness. That is the reticular formation. Contains reflex centers concerned with head movement in response to visual and auditory stimuli. That could be the pons and the midbrain. Midbrain is on top of the pons. Medulla oblongata is below the pons, and 90% of the tract will cross the middle here. Store motor skill, that is the cerebellum at the back. Typing, riding a bike, shooting a basketball, executing some moves in a video game. Those are all motor skills. Part of the limbic system that governs emotion, that is the amygdala. Amygdala. A reflex that involves curling of toes upwards and fanning of toes when the sole of the foot is struck. Babinski reflex. Receives all sensory input except for smell. Thalamus. Okay. If I may say so, this is probably so far in the course the toughest one in terms of the amount of stuff that you have to remember and understand. So please don't put it off, even though the test is not until a couple of weeks later. Please start studying as early as possible. And as usual, if you need extra help or have questions, feel free to email me. All right. So I'm gonna post this online right now, and I will see you guys next week. Okay. Have a good one. Bye for now.